They had included any kind of rationale in the rescinding of the no action letter back in August, do you think we would even be here?
It's a good question. So I think it depends what time horizon we're talking about. I think that I can reflect. I think it's exactly the right question. I've been thinking about this a lot. I have been very confused in covering this entire issue, why there has been so much secrecy on all sides of this. Why have basically none of the companies, even when it's clear they have no path forward, when they're in trouble, whatever, they're very, very tight-lipped about their regulatory situation and strategy. I think that's true across the board, PredictIt, Kalshi, Polymarket, and others. They've always preferred to really try to litigate these things secretly with their attorneys. And then on the CFTC side, it's been very weird. One of the things we've learned is that the conflict, for example, between CFTC and PredictIt, it's been long-standing. It's only with these court documents that we've gotten any real clarity on the issue. So the question to me, and I think the question you're asking is, let's say in August of 2022, um, the CFTC had said, okay, we've decided that we want to get rid of this no action letter. Let's really go through a transparent, detailed process and really lay out the case in a way that's clear cut with the Administrative Procedures Act and so forth on why we're taking this step. I think the question you're asking is, would there have been any kind of standing whatsoever for a lawsuit? My hunch here is I think the plaintiffs would have tried. I think their odds of success would have been considerably worse than they've turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like if they had just done some level of the CFTC had just done some level of due diligence back in August, this would have already been over, but PredictIt, is still on its feet and still fighting.
Yeah, and we've covered it, of course, but if you listen to the hearing at the Fifth Circuit in this case, I think the line of the hearing was when one of the judges, I'm forgetting if it was Ho or the other one, but I think in fact I think it was the guy who wrote the majority opinion. He basically described the CFTC's use of the no action letter as a license to bully. I don't think he would have said that if the CFTC had laid out a rationale. And I mean, the irony and kind of the idiocy of the CFTC's strategy is that they ended up having to outline an entire case after the fact. But by then, it was too late to to get the decision that they wanted at the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah, I mean the reasons they stated in the March letter seem reasonable on the face, at face value.
Why do you think that the CFTC chose not to provide any kind of a reason, any kind of a rationale, and did so only belatedly, even when I think by all accounts they had a perfectly reasonable, I would say even a stronger case for their decision than anything PredictIt and the plaintiffs came up with in response?
I assume it was more just human emotional decision making than any kind of strategic decision making. Like I think that quote from the Washington Post about the phone call between PredictIt and the CFTC from August, about just the CFTC just being tired of dealing with them and dealing with other people that wanted the open prediction markets. I think they were just tired of doing the work and just wanted to wash their hands of it and just wanted to get the letter out the door as quickly as possible without thinking through the consequences. That's my best guess.
Okay, I think I have a different theory, so let me lay
Okay,
it out and see what you think.
sure.
By the way, I mean, you laid this out very well in our last interview. I generally agree with you that it's a mistake in DC to think about things in a very strategic, deliberate light. I think often it is, like you said, an amalgamation of just different forces. I do actually think in this case there is a strategy animating the CFTC's decision, and here's what I think it was. I think that there was one of the things we saw from the paper trail that emerged is that there has been a lot of annoyance, confusion, tension between PredictIt and the DMO at the CFTC, where basically PredictIt has gotten they've I'll just say it. I think they flouted clearly at least the spirit, if not the letter of the 2014 no action letter. And it was just this constant cat and mouse game that was, as Vincent McGonigal said at the CFTC, taking up way too much staff time, attention, well beyond anything that was reasonable. But one of the things that the CFTC kind of, I think probably in part because the staff time didn't justify it, is that they would throw out these terms like meaningful political question or something to try to figure out what are the contours or boundaries of PredictIt's sort of ability to offer markets. And that was a very difficult negotiation back and forth. Eventually, what it led to was PredictIt not offering tweet markets, getting rid of some of its degenerate lines. And eventually they got to a point where PredictIt was basically limited to election markets. So there was this constant back and forth, and where this issue was being negotiated of precisely how wide of a net to cast for PredictIt. Now, as this is getting worked out, Kalshi comes in with it's this DMO. They want to offer the election markets. They present this argument, reasonable argument. Why can't we offer these markets when you have PredictIt out here that's not even a DMO doing this with a no action letter? And then they're getting hounded by their lobbyists, lawyers from Kalshi. Obviously, the Hill is being bombarded too by Kalshi's lawyers, lobbyists. And so now Benham is in this position where, for reasons we talked about, he doesn't want to deal with this because it's not his priority. He wants to get other things done at his chairmanship at the CFTC. What I think the strategy was here by the CFTC is basically that they don't want to spend the staff time, and not because they're lazy, but because they don't think it's a good use of taxpayer resources. They want to give Kalshi a fair hearing, and they need to contend with this claim Kalshi is making, this question Kalshi is raising of why we can't do this if PredictIt is. And so that leaves them basically with two options. Either they do a whole process where they finally figure out a regulatory scheme for these political event contracts, or they just shut down the space. And unless you are a chairman of the CFTC and you really want to make this a priority and really make this part of your legacy and take the political heat and all that, the much easier thing to do is just to shut the thing down. So then the question is, okay, why did they shut it down without a rationale as opposed to with a rationale? And I think there's a very simple answer to that, which is that the more of a reason they gave, the more of a paper trail they gave, the more precedents they set, the more they are exposing themselves to the possibility of litigation, because they have to think about litigation not only from PredictIt and Aristotle and all of that. They also had, and they remain in this position, they're also in this dilemma where if they do give the go-ahead, or if they don't nip this in the bud, they're facing the possibility of a lawsuit from Better Markets and all these other groups. I mean, there are two very clear possibilities of a lawsuit. And I think that the CFTC made a calculation that not laying out a rationale until they absolutely have to, at a very minimum, buys them time from a lawsuit. But what do you think of that theory?
That makes sense. I can see the CFTC attorneys having that train of thought. It doesn't inherently make sense to me because they seem to have had PredictIt violating the terms of the no action agreement, caught them red-handed. And this might be just sort of my personal perspective. Like at the same time, they're talking about not wanting to put the time and manpower and staff effort into regulating these markets. They're also pursuing the regulation of crypto. And I mean, I see immense societal value in prediction markets. I don't see any kind of societal value in, Tulip coin or regulating any of the various crypto assets out there. But I can see, from their train of thought why one would be more desirable to them, particularly in terms of their budget.
Yeah, and I think although it did not work out, at least for now, the way that it did for the CFTC, I think it's a defensible strategy because, as we've talked about, I'm just thinking like if I were an attorney at the CFTC and I'm trying to map this out, it was a real open question if the CFTC would even be able to come up with standing in the Fifth Circuit. And then even if they did come up with standing, if the case didn't get moved, I mean, there was a very easy scenario to see here where the case just got sent over to DC and they got their way without any kind of a rationale or having to lay out a reason. And if they did that, now they get to use this no action letter as a strong tool to regulate and police PredictIt, and they don't have to give Kalshi any kind of a standing or reasoning for a lawsuit. So, I don't know. Anyway, I mean, I think as we talked about, maybe FOIA and more reporting will shed light on this, but that is my working hypothesis for now on what happened.